Thank you for tuning to our virtual forum, Independence, the Youth's Choice. My name is Alejandro Tanon. I am the Secretary of Youth Affairs of Diaspora PIP. We are an affiliate of the Puerto Rican Independence Party. We strive to make Puerto Rico a sovereign nation with a sustainable economy and a focus on social justice. Puerto Rican diaspora, with around 6 million people, has shown many times in the past how it can exert cultural and political power, both in the United States and in Puerto Rico. Our work is mainly done in the diaspora, with members across all of the United States and through multiple generations. From people that have been in the diaspora for generations to people that have just recently joined. Today, we are bringing together 4 of these brilliant voices to talk how young Puerto Ricans are shaping the conversation for independence with framings regarding culture, law, economics, and public health. So let's meet them. First off, we have Natalia Leon. She's an undergraduate student studying sociology, political science, and Latin American studies at the Washington University in San Luis.
Hi, everyone.
Moving on, we have Diego Norat. He holds a bachelor's in international affairs and international business from Northeastern University and is currently a law student at University of Puerto Rico School of Law.
Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in, and thank you Alejandro for inviting me back, and it's always great to hang out with the folks of the Diaspora of the Puerto Rican Independence Party.
Sure. Furthermore, we have Adrian Torres. He's an undergraduate student studying economics and international affairs at the George Washington University.
Thank you, Alejandro, and hello, everybody. I am very grateful to be here. I'm very grateful to be able to speak with you today.
Finally, we have Carlo Bosques. He's a current medical student at the University of Puerto Rico School of Medicine and is also doing a master's in public policy in the University of Chicago.
Hi everybody.
When you think about the Puerto Rican people and Puerto Rico, what feels most important to you to understand about who we are today? Let's start off, Natalia.
Yeah, Puerto Rico, as we know, was colonized first by Spain, then by the United States of America, and at least in the process of Americanization that happened when the U.S. Began their colonial project in Puerto Rico, we saw how that was imposed in different mediums, education, health, religion, and other aspects that were intentionally pursued to control and civilize what they thought would be civilizing, what they deemed as savage or racially inferior population. But that never really worked because the contradiction of beginning a process of Americanization to subjugate and colonize people is just incompatible. And so Puerto Ricans have been able to distinctly preserve and also build a national identity that is grounded in our experiences of, our heritage stemming from like our historical trajectory from way beyond or way back, but also like deriving traditions from our Latin America heritage and identity. And so when I think of Puerto Rico, I think of Latin America. So for me, the pursuit of sovereignty, both economically and political, is also a pursuit of really finalizing and strengthening our cultural identity as Puerto Ricans.
What is the role of the diaspora in shaping Puerto Rico's future? Adrian?
View the Puerto Rican diaspora in many cases against the mainstream narrative that these are people that took advantage of the perfect capital and labor mobility between Puerto Rico and the United States. I think that the Puerto Rican diaspora is the victim, the direct victim of the failure of the Puerto Rico industrialization model, especially after the second half of the 20th century, in which massive amounts of population were displaced into the U.S. mainland, and that promise that Puerto Rico could not fulfill for its own population of, eliminating the structural causes of poverty and bringing a lot of people out of poverty was never accomplished. And I believe that the role that the diaspora plays in the future is that of, first of all, building a diplomatic bridge between what would be the United States and the Republic of Puerto Rico. And second of all, going back to their island, hopefully a more developed, more prosperous, more stable Puerto Rico, and you've seen their expertise and knowledge in helping Puerto Rico grow and be the best it can in terms of competitiveness and in terms of economic performance in the world scene.
I think it's a bi-directional thing, right? So I think that the diaspora in the United States over here can do a lot, certainly, to help Puerto Rico gain its political independence, of course, and be able to move past this colonial status that we have right now. But there's also a role to be played by independence movements in Puerto Rico, such as the Puerto Rican Independence Party, and with the diaspora in the United States. I think it's a mutually beneficial thing in which we can actively fight for improvement in living conditions for Puerto Ricans in the United States and improve their condition over here. And the movement in the United States can also help Puerto Rico gain its political independence. I think it works both ways, and we can certainly, it's about working together to help each one in the specific context in which they find themselves in.
Yeah, no, I agree with both Adrian and Carlo. I think historically, diasporas have played an incredibly monumental role in terms of being able to achieve self-determination for their respective colonized countries, such as the case of Ireland, for example, with which the Puerto Rican independence movement also has an intertwined history. So I think it's undeniable the role the diaspora has played and will continue to play as we aspire to the realization of our self-determination and independence.
If we look at the recent change in the political forces in the island, we see a big shift happening. In the 2016 election, the Puerto Rican Independence Party received 2% of the vote. In the 2020 election, we received 14% of the vote. Now we look at the 2024 election, we received 31% of the vote in an alliance with the Citizens' Victory Movement. Additionally, support for independence has also seemed to grow. In the 2012 referendum, independence received 5% of the vote. In the 2024 referendum, that support rose to 12%. And if we look at the different polls that have been done in the island, a lot of the support has come from the youth, people under 35, and when they poll high school students, the support is even higher. What do you attribute this growth to, and the growth of the independence movement as a whole? There you go.
Well, I think a couple things. I think, with the fracture and the failure that has been the colonial experiment in Puerto Rico over the last few decades, a lot of people from our generation, but also a lot of Puerto Ricans belonging to other generations as well, have taken notice that the current model, this model of colonial and economic exploitation perpetrated by the U.S. onto Puerto Ricans and our country as a whole no longer works. And I think it's that surge in support in the polls for the Puerto Rican independence movement and the Puerto Rican Independence Party specifically is a sign of that realization, that collective awakening, as we like to call it here in the island. And I think, it was just a matter of time before before the failure of the Estado Libre Asociado, as people call it here, and the Commonwealth status of Puerto Rico. And also there's been a role that electoral alliances have played recently, specifically since the last general election that was held in 2024. And I think that will still continue to play an important role in terms of how the Puerto Rican Independence Party gains and continues to gain support. But the reality is that we are before, this is a forum speaking to young folks over the U.S. That belong to the Puerto Rican diaspora. And I think that we are before the most pro-independence youth in the history of Puerto Rico. And I think that is, something that we need to continue to talk about because it is something that will allow us to build on not only the progress that we've historically made in terms of political advances, but also in terms of how we continue to build a prospective future of young people, both in the island and in the diaspora, that are interested in continue to work towards sovereignty and independence. And I think that's something that we need to focus on in the coming years as well.
So I would like to say I am completely in agreement with Diego. The growing support for independence is one of the symptoms, if not the culminating effect of the failure of the Puerto Rican development strategy to address the structural issues which caused the island to be deeply submerged into poverty, to have, more than 50% of your population below the federal poverty line. People are also starting to take notice, apart from the infrastructural decay, the decaying health services, the decaying education. People are also starting to take notice that, first of all, the United States cannot simply throw federal funds at the situation. We are still receiving the reconstruction funds from Maria. We received the education funds. We received Medicare funds. And we received the temporary assistance for needy families fund, the TAN funds for the PAN, which is the nutritional assistance in Puerto Rico. And people see that this does not solve the issue. People have seen that the current political status, meaning the Commonwealth, the Free Associated State, or the colony, the mass colony, cannot tend to the material necessities of the Puerto Rican people. And furthermore, people are also starting to realize that statehood is not a viable alternative. First of all, by looking at the political state of the United States right now, where you have Trump administration aggressively cutting federal funds and aids to the U.S. states, of which the main the center of the pro-statehood argument is that Puerto Rico will take more federal fundings, but the Trump, which is the president that the governor of Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez, support, is cutting federal aid to Puerto Rico, then what will be the benefits of statehood? There are very little benefits to statehood. Local, middle, lower classes would have to pay billions more in taxes under statehood. Small and medium enterprises would also have to pay 3 billion more taxes in federal taxes, and it will simply destroy the local economy. And people are starting to take notice of this, and people are also seeing the pro-independence party, Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño, as a viable alternative, because they also promote innovative choices, innovative public policy choices, which differ greatly from what has been historically done, and people are seeing a solution in what the PIP proposes, which is it has had proven success in other countries.
But to deepen this discussion a little bit, let's turn to culture. It's one of the most powerful expressions of the Puerto Rican experience, and one I think we can learn a lot about and from. So, Natalia, as you mentioned earlier, the U.S. invaded Puerto Rico in 1898. It's been more than 100 years, and there's been a lot of different efforts for assimilation. Still, many of these efforts have not really taken fruit, and Puerto Rico still has a very vibrant and distinct culture that's seen all over the world and is very strong both in the archipelago and in the diaspora. How do you explain this phenomenon?
Yeah, I think underlying your question is also I guess there can be an assumption that the assimilation process was one that wanted to incorporate Puerto Rico fully into the United States, and that's not the reality. The reality is that this has been deliberately excluding of Puerto Ricans as racialized individuals. We have been deliberately ambiguously incorporated into the U.S. order because our identity is just conflicting with that the U.S. aspires to achieve. We can point to manifest destiny, and this is something that is even more evident nowadays under the Trump presidency. And he's even referencing manifest destiny. But yeah, pointing to something that I had said before, which was just the contradictions of the Puerto Rican identity and the project of Americanization, because Puerto Ricans were deemed, like I said before, inferior, savage, and if you can't treat someone as equal, there is no point in like fully incorporating. So I want to point to that, the fact that this is also like by design exclusion, but that exclusion is also because our identity has been constructed through forces and cultural influences that come from even before the U.S. arrived to Puerto Rico, and that were still preserved in our speech. For example, we speak Spanish in some religious practices, etc., etc., but also that were like fostered and cultivated and separate in Puerto Rico due to that exclusion. We were able to preserve that culture and build that culture also simultaneously. The U.S. is built on the exclusion of racialized people. And so Puerto Ricans have resisted that exclusion by like holding on to our national identity. And we've done that through music, we've done that through the preservation of traditions in many various ways. I think there is a running joke that Puerto Ricans love wearing their flag or displaying their flag everywhere, and that is cultural pride, but also a form of resisting an order, a political and social order that was attempted to be imposed onto us and that we rejected. And I mean, we can point to the nationalist movements also in the 50s, for example, 40s as well, where that preservation of culture was a form of resistance.
What sort of connections do you see between like all these forms of like cultural expression and like explicit support for independence? Like there's some correlation there, like different connections.
Absolutely. I think the pro-independence movement in Puerto Rico is one that is based on claims to our sovereignty, territorial, political, economic sovereignty, but also a call to link our collective national identity to these claims of sovereignty. So national identity is fundamental to a movement that seeks decolonization for Puerto Rico in the political form. And so right, pro-independence movements require a national identity that is able to both like negotiate that contradiction of being politically subject to the United States, but preserving a national identity that, like I said before, is like innately and purely Latin American. Independence is also a disconnect. This is something that Juan Dalma always says is a disconnection from the U.S., but a connection to the world as well. For me, that world, my heart is always pointed to Latin America, but that also means like opening ourselves up, then Puerto Ricans opening ourselves up to like expand and strengthen our culture, also especially in a globalized world where the boundaries of what is culture and who is excluded or included in a culture are more blurred. It's more important to understand how independence is the only way that we can like fortify, strengthen our national identity. And I mean, you asked for specific, I can give you specific examples as well. And we've seen with Bad Bunny's residency, a lot of people wearing the flag or showing pride for the flag. And I think, right, claims and performances of cultural expression are very important for us to understand, wow, we truly care so much about this place, and we are willing to pursue something that demands so much sacrifice, like it is, like independence does. But that shouldn't be devoid of political claims and action. I mean, we've seen members of the PNP Pro Statehood Party at Bad Bunny's concert being proud of the Puerto Rican national identity displayed there, and that presents a contradiction, and that is that we can't depoliticize our culture. We need to understand that culture is a way in which also power operates, and if we express a national identity, we sing the songs that we like to sing on Christmas and La Sanse, and we dance Bomba y Plena, but we don't really understand that preservation is a result of years of resistance, of persecution. I mean, Bad Bunny says it in his song, mataron gente por sacar la bandera. If we don't understand that history and we don't carry that in our joy and our expression of culture, then we are just succumbing to the cultural hegemony of the U.S., because the U.S. has been able to I mean, we have been able to continue being a colony of the U.S. because the order has been able to both like sustain, I guess, or sustain our separate cultural identity and all of these colonial forces. So whenever we think of national identity, the Independence Party and the independence movement overall is always paying attention to how we do that, but also like in doing that, also linking the importance of politicizing our culture.
Welcome, everyone. Like, a lot of people are confused. What are we? You talk to people. You say, yeah, like what's happening with Puerto Rico? Your state? No. Can you explain? Can you help us understand what Puerto Rico is?
Well, I guess in simplest terms, if there was a middle point between hell and what goes after that, Puerto Rico would be exactly in that place. You know, whenever I talk about this topic, being a law school student, I always like to start with a great phrase by Rubén Berríos Martínez, the president of the Puerto Rican Independence Party, in which he says that the existence of colonialism in Puerto Rico, always ignominious, though at times blatant and covert, is still an undeniable reality. And I think that continues to be the case, right? But in terms of the legal framework in which Puerto Ricans exist, I think it's important to start by the beginning. And in terms of how our colonial condition came to be, apart from the military occupation that took place after the end of the Hispanic-American War in 1898, it's important to point out the role that the insular cases had. And I think the insular cases, in very simple terms, are just a series of judicial decisions in which the Supreme Court of the United States established the principle that the Constitution does not necessarily follow the flag. And what this means in constitutional terms is that peoples of territories like Puerto Rico, like ourselves, were not to be protected by the same rights as the residents of fully incorporated states, even if they had been extended citizenship under law, which became our case after 1917 with the approval of the Jones Act. And I think it's very important for people to understand that the history and the profound effect these judicial decisions had on Puerto Ricans continue to have a long-lasting effect into our daily lives. And you know, it's since become evident that the territorial incorporation doctrine, in which the Supreme Court of the United States adopted in a very infamous case known as Dons v. Bidwell, in which they first started to say and started to distinguish Puerto Rico from other states. And that's where the infamous, label of unincorporated territory came to be. And that's how I would define what we are under the terms the Supreme Court of the U.S. decided to use. Those were not terms we chose to distinguish ourselves from the U.S., but terms the U.S. chose to distinguish themselves from us. And in terms of that, like I said, the court's novel distinction between incorporated and unincorporated territories and downs served to validate the theory that Congress had the ability to govern Puerto Rico as a colonial authority, which is what we refer to as plenary powers of Congress over Puerto Rico, which they continue to have. And I think the court's colonialist rationale back then was that the status of an unincorporated territory relieved Congress of any and all responsibility to ensure that a full guarantee of constitutional rights could be secured for the citizens of Puerto Rico. But most importantly, people need to understand that self-determination is not a light question. It's something that it's come to be known as a peremptory norm of international law. And what this means is that even if countries do not abide by treaties that incorporate self-determination as a right of all peoples, it is a legal norm that all countries in the world must follow and all states must follow. Apart from that, the United States has said, at least since the 1900s, that international law is a part of their body of law. So by holding Puerto Rico hostage as a colony, the United States is not only violating their intrinsic principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that are enshrined in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but also they are in open and clear violation of international law, and that is undeniable. And the Puerto Rican Independence Party and the independence movement historically as a whole has gone countless times before the United Nations to communicate that to the world, to communicate the fact that after more, than 100 years of colonial domination, we continue to be in a position where we cannot choose the model that we want to choose for ourselves to be able to govern and have self-governance for Puerto Rico.
If Puerto Rico were to become independent, we will have to sort of like fend for ourselves. And Puerto Rico is a very small nation, very little natural resources. How can a country like this truly be independent and fend for itself and have like economic development?
So my answer to this will be a bit shorter than the other ones. I had a bit of I got too carried away with the other answers, but I will make this one very clear and concise. And it's a matter of fact of development. I would like to mention two stylized facts about development. The first one is that the richest countries in the world have similar populations and demographic and geographical compositions to Puerto Rico. When you look at the list of the richest countries in the world, what you see are islands. You see Taiwan, you see Singapore, which is Singapore is smaller than the entire metropolitan area of Puerto Rico. You see Hong Kong. You see, for example, in Africa, you have the Seychelles Islands. So you see that there's a common trend that the richest countries in the world lack natural resources. And as a matter of fact, there are several economic studies which have concurred that there is actually a negative correlation between development and having natural resources. This is commonly known as the Dutch disease, in which countries with natural resources, as a matter of fact, right now have less, on average, less GDP per capita, meaning less rich, than countries who do not have natural resources and are small islands. Almost all small islands in the world are rich countries now. So we do not have any reason to believe that Puerto Rico would be in any different case.
Well, that's very like ironic or like unintuitive. You would think like more resources you have, the more things you can do, but like it's very interesting to see like how the reality is in like our, I guess, interconnected world. And we're gonna move on to the next topic. So thank you for giving us this entire economic landscape and ramifications, how it affects our history, our future, and our possibilities. But now I think we're gonna focus on something more, I guess, that affects people, their daily lives. Everyone really interacts with this. It's a part of the human experience, and that's healthcare. So I would like Carlo to join us now, and I'll start with a general question. This is, how would you describe the current healthcare system in Puerto Rico, and how would you tie it to Puerto Rico's political status?
So, I would not say that the healthcare system right now is doing too well. I feel like that's an understatement. But I would say it's not doing too well right now, the healthcare system, for multiple reasons. I'm not going to go super in-depth into every single one of them, but the biggest takeaway really from what you're seeing in the healthcare system in Puerto Rico is that you have a privatized healthcare system, one that's modeled before that of the United States, but taken to an extreme that you really don't see even in some states over there. So what do I mean by that? When you look at the coverage in Puerto Rico, the way people actually have health insurance, so you have three major populations in the island. So you have the private sector, which is actually the smallest sector. These are private health insurance plans, and that sector is actually facing a lot of financial difficulties right now with being able to cover adequately the patients in Puerto Rico. And I actually see it in practice over there in Puerto Rico when I was doing the medical school portion of this dual degree. When I was over there, I would see a lot of patients that they would have on paper very good private health insurance plans, but they would still have difficulty accessing healthcare services. There's a shortage of physicians. The health insurance plans will reject treatments even if they have supposedly the highest quality plans. So you actually have a situation where even if you have coverage, you are what they call in health policy underinsured. So sure, you have insurance, but you don't have insurance that's adequate that can actually provide you with the coverage you need. And so it's all really interrelated, because when you look at the actual health insurance, the public health insurance sector, it's public, in quotation marks, because really what you're seeing is this model of privatization that was taken over from the United States and taken to an extreme. So you have Medicaid in Puerto Rico. Medicaid, the way you memorize it is Medicaid, aid is assistance. So the way it was named like that, it was because it's an assistance to people that, are below a certain threshold in income. And basically, Medicaid is supposed to be an assistance to those people, and it's supposed to provide coverage at little to no cost to the patient that has that health insurance. Now, the thing is, Medicaid right now in Puerto Rico is 100% privatized. So these are public funds. I want to point that out. These are public funds that come both from the federal government of the United States as well as from the government of Puerto Rico. And these are funds that are handed over to private health insurance companies, so that for profit, mind you, I want to point that out. These are for-profit health insurance companies that then manage those funds supposedly to be able to provide coverage for Medicaid recipients. The situation is, in practice, what you see is that these companies have, very high salaries, very high administrative costs. So you have a lot of costs going not to healthcare itself, but to the actual administration of the healthcare system. We're talking about $1 billion. More than $1 billion were dedicated to that, which is the administration of these health insurance companies. And the terrible thing is that a lot of the same companies that provide private health insurance are also the same companies that are profiting off of Medicaid public funds. And they're also a lot of the same companies that also cover Medicare patients. Medicare is the health insurance for people that are 65 years and older. So that's like a super brief overview of like the way health insurance works in Puerto Rico. Most of the healthcare facilities in Puerto Rico are private. Many of them are going bankrupt around the island, precisely because there is no capacity to really coordinate financing across the island so that you can ensure infrastructure, for example, in an area with a smaller amount of population, but that still needs healthcare. You can't really do that under the privatized sort of healthcare system that we have right now. And the private health insurance companies, they're not going to do that either, right? They're looking for their own they're looking out for their own bottom line as health insurance companies. And so what you have is this fragmented, this may be a little bit confusing, right? But you have this very fragmented, very broken healthcare system. It's not integrated in any way, shape, or form, and it's all handed up, mostly financed with public funds, and it's all of it handed over to these private health insurance companies. So they have an oversized control over that, which is the healthcare insurance sector in Puerto Rico, the coverage that people have, regardless of whether it's supposedly statutorily private or public. So what you see under this model is an exaggeration of those policies that were implemented in the United States. Why do I underscore this? I highlight it because of the fact that public policy with regards to healthcare in Puerto Rico has always sought to emulate trends in the United States, at least within that specific current that is the statehood movement. So you start to see this emulation of, privatization, of handing over this public money to private companies. You see this as the statehood movement actually starts gaining power in Puerto Rico over the years. This was a big reason actually as to why I started to really rethink status, political alignments and all that sort of thing, because you start to realize that the policy positions they adopt are actually very closely related also to what they think the future status of Puerto Rico should be. So the statehood movement was actually the one that created the system that we have right now, this highly privatized healthcare system that does not prioritize the healthcare of people, but rather prioritizes the profits of these health insurance companies. And before this, we used to have a different healthcare system. Before the 90s, when this system was established with health insurance companies, private health insurance companies managing most of these funds, we used to have a healthcare system that was almost entirely public, modeled after the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, a model that to this day exists over there in the UK, a model that still exists in Costa Rica, a model that still exists in Brazil, which was actually established simultaneously as Puerto Rico's privatization. So as we were privatizing our healthcare system, Brazil over there in the 90s, they were going towards a universal healthcare system, the other way around, which is also an argument, as to independence, how one can actually shape one's own policies when one has that capacity. So we have this universal healthcare system before the 90s that while not perfect, it was able to provide healthcare to anybody who needed it, regardless of their capacity to pay. So it was a public healthcare system. We have public hospitals, public clinics all around the island that did not take into account profit, right, that they could make in a specific region of the island, or rather focus on the population that was in that area and the care that they needed and tailored it to those specific needs. And this was done during a period in Puerto Rico during Luis Muñoz Marin, the governor, which with the Puerto Rican Independence Party, we don't particularly love the guy. But under that period, it was developed. And the interesting thing is because it was aligned really with those policies that were being pushed in the United States. So what I want to highlight is that we in Puerto Rico have been able to develop our own policy, universal healthcare, public healthcare systems, insofar as the governing colonial class thinks that it corresponds to the priorities of the United States. So long as they think that the United States is going to do this, then they'll do it. And what I really think that we should be looking at here is, should we really be giving these public funds to these private health insurance companies, or should we start moving towards a system where it's centered on health and not the profit, right, of these companies? And I think that requires a shift in thinking, not begging the United States for more money for these private health insurance companies, because that's basically the policy that both the pro-statehood and the pro-colony parties have adopted. They just want to ask for more money for health insurance companies, private. And we need to move beyond that and start thinking about the policies that we want to adopt that center patients and not profits. So
once we close off, I want to ask just one last question to all of you. The order is going to be Carlo, Diego, Adrian, and Natalia, so you can just follow after each other. So a simple question. Just want to ask, so why do you personally support independence for Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so during the next 20 minutes as I answer that, hopefully I'll be able to address everything. No, I'm kidding. Why do I support independence? I come from a pro-statehood family. I want to point that out. A lot of people in my family historically have supported statehood, and that was the status option, which I by default also supported, at least during my youth. And I think as one lives in the United States and sees the way the United States is, those differences with Puerto Rico, both economic, social, cultural, governance, social priorities, they're very different. And so the reason I support independence is simply because I realized it's not because I hate the United States, it's because I believe that Puerto Rico constitutes its own nationality, its own nation, and it should express itself in the world as such. It should have the ability to pursue policies more in tune with its own reality, universal healthcare being one very close to my interests, but policies adopted to its reality. And that's really the reason why I support independence. We should have control over our own destiny and not depend on others and emulate others to push ourselves forward. So yeah, that's the reason I support independence. If we want freedom, if we want a better future, you don't find that being a colony, and statehood is not going to happen. And people that have lived in the States know that. So we need to move towards independence and assert ourselves in the world and finally get that destiny that we deserve.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Carlo. I think a very used saying that we refer to in the Puerto Rican Independence Party is that independence is not a magical wand that will solve all of our problems, but rather a toolbox from which we can draw on and build a better future and destiny, right? And I think that's practically the main reason why I support independence, but also because, as I mentioned before during my intervention, Puerto Ricans, we have an inalienable right to independence, that it is not a privilege, that is not something we have to beg or even ask for. That is our inalienable right as a people that constitute a separate national and cultural entity. And as part of that broader, international political community, I think we not only have the right, but the obligation to finally join them and join the other peoples of the world as a free and sovereign state.
Building up on what both Diego and Carlos said regarding independence, I would say to my listeners is that independence, we much regard independence as an open toolbox. In terms, mainly economically speaking, independence gives us, first of all, the right to the ability to regulate capital inflows and outflows into our country, canalize investment, most importantly, negotiate trade deals with other countries. Um, uh, it gives us the power to have our own monetary policy because, as we know, the monetary policy imposed by the Federal Reserve of the United States into Puerto Rico does not correspond to our business cycle and can sometimes even exacerbate existing recessions. So I believe that having our own central bank and having the Republic of Puerto Rico have their own investment fund central bank is something that I dream of and I aspire of. And like Diego said, I will dedicate my whole life too, but in more speaking more in more emotional terms, away from the materialistic things, is that all of the people of the world have a right to self-sovereignty, and Puerto Rico is not exception to that. You know, the colony and the development models of the under the colony have miserably failed. Colonialism has been a nefariously implemented experiment in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is structurally poor. It will keep being structurally poor under the colony, and
Yeah, I'll speak more to the cultural argument, I guess. As we talked before, Puerto Rico has a vibrant, very robust national identity and culture. We have everything except political sovereignty. And I believe that this political sovereignty, or this lack of political sovereignty, I should say, is what inhibits our capacity to economically develop. This economic stagnation is a direct result from or of colonial subjugation. And this is the reason why we face the precarity that my peers have already communicated. I believe us as Puerto Ricans, we have survived for too long. We keep surviving, and we deserve to start choosing what path we want for our future. We deserve to start building our future instead of surviving all the time. I believe that independence is the only political status that eliminates the coloniality of power, to borrow from Quijano. These power structures that keep people oppressed and subjugated. And the political status of independence is the only one that will guarantee decolonization for Puerto Rico. Salvador Allende had a phrase for the political transformation of Chile. He said that it would be achieved con sabor a empanada y vino, with the flavor of empanada and wine. And I believe, I talked about culture in this forum, so I'm going to say that the independence of Puerto Rico will happen con el ritmo de bomba y plena.
That's a powerful, amazing way to close us off. Thank you all. I wanna add that I think as young Puerto Ricans, we have a responsibility to learn about all these topics, to be able to speak on them, to be able to speak about our homeland, and to understand it critically. Like if we want a better future, we have to build it ourselves. Nobody else is gonna do it for us, and we gotta make sure that we have the tools to do it. We hope this conversation serves as just one step, this long endeavor that we're all encaminated towards, of learning and struggle as we fight for the Puerto Rico that we envision. So I want to thank all the panelists for joining us, taking the time out of their day. And thank you all for watching our forum. If you want to stay up to date with other stuff we do, follow our Instagram, Diaspora PIP. Thank you all and have a good night.
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.